At Pearl Harbor, there is a battleship that never stops standing guard. The USS Missouri sits at her dock, with her bow aimed deliberately at one spot in the water, the sunken wreck of the USS Arizona, 400 yards away, where more than 1,000 men are still entombed. That was no accident. The Navy positioned her that way on purpose. The ship that ended the Second World War, watching over the ship where it began. And the Missouri is only one of four. In 1940, America ordered the most powerful battleships it had ever designed. 6 of them. Only 4 ever reached the sea. Those 4 fought in every major American war from the Pacific to the Gulf, and each one is still here today, floating in 4 different American cities. One of them nearly killed a sitting president. One is the most decorated battleship in the entire US Navy, and you have almost certainly never heard its name. One carries a ghost, the nose of a ship that was never finished, and 2 of the 6 simply vanished from the story. By the time we are done, you will know exactly where all 4 of the survivors are now, what really happened inside their steel, and why America can never, ever build another one. Hold on to that number. 6 ordered, 4 built, because the missing 2 come back at the very end. To understand why they still matter, you have to understand what America built. In the middle of the Second World War, the Navy ordered a class of ship unlike anything before it, the Iowa class. Each of the 4 that were finished ran 887 feet long, nearly 3 football fields. Each displaced around 57,000 tons fully loaded, heavier than 3 modern destroyers put together, and each could still hit over 33 knots, faster than most destroyers of the day, built long and lean to run with the fast carriers. There was even a strange rule behind that shape. The hull had to be narrow enough to squeeze through the locks of the Panama Canal. The locks were 110 feet wide, so the beam was pinned at just over 108 feet, and to carry the armor and the guns anyway, the ship had to grow long instead. Where it counted, the armor ran well over a foot of hardened steel, built to trade blows with another battleship and keep fighting. But the reason the whole world remembers the Iowa class sits up on deck. 9 guns, 16 inches across, and what they could do is hard to even picture until you see the numbers. The barrel of a single gun ran 66 feet long and weighed around 120 tons, more than a loaded semi-truck, and that is just one barrel of 9. Each one fired a shell weighing 2,700 pounds, about the weight of a small car, out past 20 miles, and with the right round, closer to 24. Now picture all 9 firing at once. A single full broadside threw more than 24,000 pounds of steel, over 12 tons, at the enemy in one pull of the trigger, and the recoil was violent enough to shove the entire ship sideways in the water. Each of the 3 turrets was a building in its own right, 3 stories tall, reaching deep below the waterline, weighing as much as a destroyer, worked by dozens of men in perfect sequence. And here is a detail that still stuns engineers. Those guns were aimed by analog mechanical computers, gears and cams, no software of any kind. And when the Navy tested modern digital systems against them in the 1980s, the old machines were so accurate they were simply left in place. And they were frighteningly accurate. Off truck in 1944, 2 of these ships straddled a fleeing Japanese destroyer from more than 20 miles away, a moving target, at a range where the curve of the Earth itself starts to matter. Of every battleship class ever built, only Japan's giant Yamato could throw a heavier punch. Now where are they and what did they live through? Start with the one you already know, the USS Missouri, the mighty Mo. She fought through the brutal final battles of the Pacific, Iwo Jima and Okinawa, and off Okinawa, a Japanese kamikaze slammed into her side. The next day, her captain ordered that young enemy pilot buried at sea with full military honors, a fallen airman given the dignity of a sailor. But her most famous moment came a few months later. On the 2nd of September 1945, in Tokyo Bay, a plain table was carried onto her deck for a signing that would end the deadliest war in human history. The first table they brought up turned out to be too small, and a larger one had to be found at the last minute and covered with a green cloth. Japanese officials in formal coats came aboard. General MacArthur stood at the microphone, signed the surrender with several pens, and gave them away one by one as souvenirs. In 23 minutes, it was over. The Missouri went on to fight in Korea, and in 1991, she opened fire in the Gulf War, firing Tomahawk missiles alongside the same 16-inch guns she carried in 1945. And when she was finally retired and brought home to Pearl Harbor as a museum, the placement was argued over carefully. The Arizona is a war grave. Nearly 2 million people visit it every year. So the Missouri was moored back from it but turned to face it. Her bow points straight at the Arizona, 400 yards away. the ship that closed the war, standing watch over the ship where it opened. In one small stretch of water, you are standing between the first shot and the final signature. Second ship, and the one carrying the strangest history of all four, the USS Iowa. In November of 1943, she was handed a mission so secret most of her own crew weren't told until they were already at sea. She was carrying President Franklin Roosevelt across the Atlantic to meet Churchill and Stalin, with German U-boats still hunting those waters. They even fitted a special bathtub into the captain's quarters because the president used a wheelchair, and that bathtub is still bolted into the ship today. You can look right into it. 3 days out, it nearly went catastrophically wrong. One of her own escort destroyers, the USS William D. Porter, accidentally fired a live torpedo, armed, running hot, straight at the Iowa with the president aboard. The Porter broke radio silence to scream a warning. The Iowa turned hard, and the torpedo blew up harmlessly in her wake. Roosevelt reportedly asked to be wheeled out on deck to watch it. The Porter became the most notorious ship in the fleet after that. Other ships would radio ahead asking what she'd sunk lately, but the Iowa carries a far heavier scar. On the 19th of April, 1989, during a live fire exercise, an explosion tore through her No. 2 turret and killed 47 sailors, the worst peacetime loss the surface fleet had suffered in years. The Navy's first investigation blamed one dead sailor, claiming he did it deliberately. That finding was challenged, then formally retracted. The real cause was never established, and for 47 families, the apology came years too late. Today, the Iowa is a museum in Los Angeles, and most visitors walk right past Turret 2 without knowing what happened inside it. Third ship, and here is the fact almost nobody knows. The most decorated battleship in the history of the US Navy is not the one that ended the war, and not the one that carried a president. It is the USS New Jersey. 19 battle stars, 4 separate wars, reactivated and retired 4 different times, more comebacks than any other battleship in American history. She fired shells in the Pacific, then poured more rounds into the Korean coast than almost any ship of her class, then stood off Vietnam dropping 16-inch shells onto targets no aircraft could safely reach. Then came back one more time in the 1980s, bristling with tomahawks, and fired her guns in anger off Beirut in 1983. And still, ask most people to name a famous battleship and they'll never say her name. Today, she rests on the Camden waterfront, right across the river from Philadelphia, the very city where she was built. In 2024, for the first time since 1991, they floated her into dry dock and spent around $10 million scraping, sealing, and repainting her hull. They are not letting this one rot. Fourth ship, the USS Wisconsin, the big whiskey, and she is hiding something the other 3 are not. Look closely at her bow and you are looking at a ghost. In 1956, in heavy fog, the Wisconsin collided with a destroyer and mangled her own bow. The Navy needed her back at sea fast, so they did something almost unbelievable. Out in the yard sat the never-finished Battleship Kentucky, one of the 2 that were ordered but never completed. They cut the entire bow section off the Kentucky, floated it over on a barge, and grafted 120-ton, 68-foot bow onto the Wisconsin in about 16 days. To this day she sails, and now rests at Norfolk wearing the nose of a sister ship that never truly existed. And the Wisconsin holds one more distinction. In February of 1991, in the Gulf War, she and the Missouri fired the last 16-inch shells an American battleship has ever fired in combat. After that, the great guns went silent for good. Which brings us back to that number. 6 were ordered, only 4 reached the sea. So what happened to the other 2? The USS Illinois was never finished. Construction stopped near the end of the war, and years later she was quietly broken up for scrap. A battleship that never once touched salt water as a warship. And the USS Kentucky, the Kentucky, got closer. Her hull was actually launched to clear the building dock, floated, and then left unfinished for years while the Navy argued about what to do with her. In the end, she was never completed either. But the Kentucky's story does not quite end in the scrapyard, because when the Wisconsin needed a new bow in 1956, it was the Kentucky's bow they cut off and welded on. So one of the 4 museum ships you can walk today is, in part, built from a battleship that was never born. Of 6 sisters, 4 became legends and 2 became ghosts, and even the ghosts refused to completely disappear. Here is the part that separates these 4 from every other retired warship in history. When the battleships were paid off in the early 1990s, the Navy was not allowed to simply strike them from the books. Congress stepped in and forbade it. A law from 1996 ordered the Navy to keep at least 2 Iowa-class ships in fighting condition on the Naval Vessel Register until the fleet could prove it had firepower that matched them. It never could. And it went further than a list. When the last two, the Iowa and the Wisconsin, were finally handed over to become museums in 2006, Congress wrote the condition into the transfer itself. The ships had to be kept fit to fight, and the Navy could take them back in a national emergency. A year later, lawmakers spelled it out even further. Even the donated 16-inch gun barrels and shells could be recalled if the battleships ever returned to service. The requirement to keep the Wisconsin recall ready wasn't fully lifted until December of 2009, nearly 2 decades after her last shot. No other warships in American history were kept on a leash that long, and the reason was brutally simple. Those guns fired in any weather, day or night, and a 2,700-pound shell cannot be jammed, decoyed, or shot down the way an aircraft can. Which raises the obvious question. If they were that valuable, why not just build new ones? And this is where the story turns, because the honest answer is the hard one. America cannot build these battleships again. It is not about money and not about will. The capability itself is simply gone. Start with the guns. Those 16-inch barrels were forged by a generation of shipyard craftsmen using tooling that no longer exists, and the men who knew how to make them are gone. Then the shells. The Navy stopped producing the 2,700-pound rounds decades ago, and every test and ceremony only draws the finite stockpile down further. Then the strangest one of all, the propellant. Each gun was fired with silk bags of a specific smokeless powder, 6 bags to a shot, and no factory on Earth still manufactures them. And then the ships themselves run on steam, enormous oil-fired boilers driving turbines, a technology the modern Navy walked away from generations ago, with almost no one left trained to run it. Put it together, and the truth is stark. Even the ships kept in perfect museum condition could never realistically fire those guns in a war again. The battleship didn't just retire. The ability to make another one died with it. So it is fair to ask, with missiles and carriers, did any of it actually matter? It did. And the reason is money as much as firepower. A single modern cruise missile costs well over $1 million, and a ship carries a few dozen of them before it has to sail home to reload. A 16-inch shell cost a tiny fraction of that, and a battleship carried more than 1,000 of them in her magazines. A destroyer needs 1/5 of the crew and reaches 1,000 miles with a missile, but it empties fast and it empties expensively. For raw, sustained, all-weather firepower against a coast, nothing since has matched the sheer volume of steel a battleship could put down, hour after hour, for the price. That is the capability America quietly gave up, not because something better replaced it, but because the ships, the crews, and the factories all aged out at once. And that is what makes these 4 ships so strange to stand next to today. They are not just museums. They are the last complete battleships left anywhere on the planet. The final examples of the single most powerful class of surface warship ever built, preserved at the exact moment the world lost the ability to reproduce them. Every rivet, every gun, every boiler is a piece of an industrial age that no longer exists. Walk their decks and you are not looking at old ships. You are looking at the end of a line, the last of a kind that can never come again. 4 ships, 4 cities: Pearl Harbor, Los Angeles, Camden, and Norfolk. One still stands watch over the grave of the ship where the war began. One carries the memory of a president and 47 lost sailors. One is the most decorated and least famous of them all, and one wears the face of a sister that never lived. They were the biggest guns America ever put to sea, and they are never coming back. Which is exactly why the 4 that remain are worth crossing the country to see.